This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 11th of May 2022 at home in Wicklow, and it was recorded in a hurry because I was on the clock. But it is essentially a reflection on heroes and heroes in fiction, and specifically in my case heroes from the movies and comic books. And I discuss in this episode the desire to consume heroes and what the implications are of that, and what heroism might be, and whether heroism is a particularly useful word to use, or whether it's infantilizing to those of us who have a relationship with fictional heroes. And I look at the original Star Wars movies and that world, and I also look at Batman, the creation from the comic books, the graphic novels, the TV series, and the movies, and most recently earlier this year the Matt Reeves movie, The Batman. And I look at how my daughter deals with disappointment, and I somehow find a connection between that idea of being disappointed in life and then seeking positive compensation elsewhere. I think that's kind of the main idea. So yeah, so that's what's coming up in this episode. And there's also a musical outing that sort of prompted a lot of this thinking as well. So get into it, and I'll see you there, right around the corner. Cheers, bye.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. Welcome to it. Welcome to episode 51 of this podcast, which is dedicated to explorations of wellness, explorations of coping mechanisms, explorations of how we do this thing called life, and the methods, the tools that are used for this ongoing exploration are tools like storytelling, confessional storytelling, movies, sport, martial arts, philosophy, psychology, and anything else I can throw in the bag. So there you go. Now, today's episode, I'm very much on the clock. I've got a timer on, so this will be a shorter episode to follow last week's epic. Which was a look at Puritanism and conscience as a tool of defiance, as a tool of righteous identity claiming in the face of puritanical persecution. And I used Arthur Miller's The Crucible as a case study, and also Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, and the backdrop of World War II and the persecution of the Jews in that conflict, and the Holocaust, and the illusion of racial superiority. This week, nothing quite so heavy, and the reason for that is I don't have a plan, because it's just been busy. It's been busy, and the planning time has been stolen away by the passage of time. And here I find myself sitting down in this tiny window to record. However, as always, it's not like there aren't thoughts swimming around my capacious noggin. It's not like there aren't notions knocking on the door. It's not like there aren't concepts butting up against one another, vying for my attention so I can attempt to clarify them. And let's not forget that that is very much part of the mission statement here at the Clear Out, to declutter, to clarify, to connect. I mean, everything I do here is ultimately an attempt at joined up thinking, connecting the dots of varied and discrete thoughts and seeing where they connect and where they meet. And this is a lifelong habit, and maybe it's a juvenile lens through which I view things, but it started long ago, long ago, in a galaxy far away. I'm going to come back to that galaxy far, far away. I'm probably misquoting that, but that's meant to be a Star Wars reference. The scrolling opening, establishing information for the Star Wars world that scrolled upwards from south to north on the screen before the first Star Wars movie began all those years ago in 1977. I'm going to return to that for a very specific reason, which I'll share with you shortly. But I was just recalling that when I was an undergraduate in Maynooth University, St. Patrick's College, Maynooth University, 30 odd years ago. They were 30 very odd years, 30 unusual years ago, when I was studying. There's that bloody rooster. When I was studying, there's that bloody rooster crowing on the fence. Get off the fence, rooster. Get off the fence. Take a position. I was studying English literature and philosophy, and for my thesis, for my graduation, to complete my degree in philosophy, my thesis was fundamentally the first probably official record of a little bit of joined up thinking. And as I said, my disclaimer before, maybe it was a bit simplistic, but my thesis was fundamentally about how Plato and Nietzsche had some common ground, and I did a thesis on basically a Platonic Nietzschean affinity, where they both had ideas around. Nietzsche had the Übermensch, the Superman, rising above the crowd, rising above the sort of torment of eternal recurring existence. And Nietzsche had the philosopher king idea, the man rising up above the crowd through contemplation of Platonic forms, the realm of forms. I spoke about this in an earlier episode, how Plato conceived of a metaphysical realm, a domain beyond what we can see here on Earth, where there existed an ideal version of everything that we saw in the world, an ideal, perfect representation of anything that we could find in the real world, in the mortal material world. And so everything in the material world was but a facsimile, a shadow, a reflection, a copy, an imitation, a knockoff. And so in the material world, we're only ever eating junk food, in a way, spiritual junk food. And the way to elevate ourselves and reach higher understanding is to reflect on the forms. That rooster's going to drive me demented. But as I was saying to my Tai Chi students earlier today, the rooster doesn't realise he's only one axe chop from the pot. I don't know if you'd eat a rooster that's been knocking around. Would you eat a rooster that you had on your hands for a while? Yeah, anyway. Maybe he'll shut up. So, in any case, the point I'm trying to make is the connected thinking was there at a relatively young age. Yeah. And so more of the same has persisted through the years. And that's what you get to listen to here every week on the Clear Out. If you're a regular listener, maybe you're an irregular listener. An irregular listener who frequented the odd years, the years of oddness and irregularity. So, I mentioned the Star Wars not opening credits, but that scroll of world building information, the famous south to north scroll that went upwards on your screen. And in fact, you know what? I'm going to cheat and bring up the words so I can actually quote them properly. And there it is. It's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Yeah, that's it. And then it goes on and on about the rebels and the Empire, and then you have that amazing, and it's still very effective because I rewatched the movie last week again for a reason. That amazing opening shot of a rebel spaceship in space, flying from north to south across the screen, and you're like, oh cool, that's a great spaceship, and you hear the sound of gunfire, and then an enormous spaceship follows it in pursuit and completely takes over the screen, and it's an Imperial Star Destroyer, is that what it's called? I'd have to go back and check my Star Wars lingo and vocabulary, and go to a Star Wars glossary. But anyway, a Star Destroyer, Death Destroyer, can't remember, but a triangular shaped massive spaceship in pursuit, and there's a planet in the distance, and so it's a very brilliant effect and sets the sort of scale and brings us into the world of Star Wars right off the bat. It's a brilliant movie opening, iconic. Now, why am I mentioning it? I'm mentioning it because last week my wife and my daughter and myself, we went to the National Concert Hall in Dublin to listen to a concert of the music of Star Wars, composed by John Williams, the legendary film composer who also composed music to many other iconic films. That was very Irish pronunciation there. It was a great film. I really enjoyed it. And I do love the Star Wars. I've always loved the Star Wars. And another movie where John Williams did the music was, did you ever see The Jaws? The Jaws, and he also did The Superman. That can be a habit. Do you know that? That can be a little habit to stick the old "the" in front of a movie title where it doesn't exist. In any case, John Williams, Jaws, Superman, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. He probably did Close Encounters as well. I shouldn't be surprised. John Williams scores everywhere, and you have the, again, if you watch Star Wars movies, as if you're a man of my age, a Gen X male, someone who was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and you liked movies and you were alive to pop culture, in a way you can't not have consumed or been indoctrinated into the world of Star Wars to some degree. And I was a huge fan, And so you'll know some of that music, you'll know some of the famous themes. But this concert we went to last week, it played music from across the 9 canonical Star Wars films. So if that doesn't mean anything to you, if I say that, I'll try to explain it very simply. So George Lucas was the writer and director and creator of the world of Star Wars. He envisaged and created this world of kind of interplanetary warfare and different sides of the conflict, and this mystical energy called the Force, and the sort of advocates and practitioners of the Force were these samurai-like, extremely disciplined, noble warriors called Jedis or Jedi Knights. And the Jedi seemed to represent, harmony with the world and the universe and nature, and they seemed to represent diversity and inclusion. And then on the other side of the conflict were the Imperial forces, the forces of the Emperor, and they were all, of course, about conquest and subjectification and destroying planets and cultures and bringing everyone to yoke at the heel of the Empire's boot. And the Emperor's chief force warrior was Darth Vader, a lapsed Jedi Knight who fell to the dark side of the Force. Now, Lucas conceived this huge world in a way a bit like J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings, a sole creator of a world with its own culture, its own language, and I mean plural, cultures, languages, breeds, species, conflicts, histories, legacies, lineages. A huge feat of fictional creation. And when George Lucas eventually produced his first Star Wars movie, it's called, if you go back and, again, if you're uninitiated, it's called Episode 4, A New Hope. And so nothing had preceded it. So you're going, what the hell are you talking about? How is this Episode 4, A New Hope? What was the old hope? What happened to the hope, the pre-existing hope? And where were the first 3 chapters? But George Lucas clearly had a great instinct to go, no, this is where we should start with this stage of the story, this stage of this kind of epic story that I've conceived. And so we pick it up with a very interesting band of heroes, this ragtag bunch who take on the might of the Empire and triumph in this first installment that we were exposed to back in 1977. And what followed were 2 sequels to that first film. So you had Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi. And it brought the hero journey of the young Luke Skywalker to a very natural conclusion, where he returns in the third part of the trilogy as an accomplished and highly competent Jedi Knight, and leads this last phase of the Resistance, the Rebellion. And then many, many years later, George Lucas went, it's time to show the first 3 chapters, and they were far less successful in terms of their storytelling and in terms of the characters that they introduced. And those first 3 chapters, introduced us to the young Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker. And again, sorry, I'm not here to break down the entire story of Star Wars. So there were those next 3 movies which told the story of what had led up to the 1977 movie. And then in recent years, we had another trilogy of films which picked up many years after the original third part that we saw in whatever that was, 83, I think it was, The Return of the Jedi. And so we finally got chapters 7, 8, 9. Now, that's the 9 canonical Star Wars films, and there's a through line with certain characters that connect all 9 movies. Also, there were a couple of other tangentially connected stories. There was a Han Solo movie from a couple of years ago that wasn't loved by critics. I quite liked it. And then there was a one called Rogue One, which connects to the very first Star Wars movie we were given. But they are not considered strictly canon because they exist discreetly and separately from the worlds and the characters that we met in the original movies. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying last Wednesday, when my wife and daughter and I went to the National Concert Hall, we heard the music from those 9 movies, the 9 movies that comprise the 3 connected trilogies. And first things first, the music was absolutely phenomenal. And you're hearing it differently. To hear it in isolation, away from the images of the movies, and to see the orchestra perform it, was just an opportunity to appreciate the brilliance of the composer and how nuanced much of the music is, and how textured and layered, and how he uses every part of the orchestra to bring out different notes and flavors and different characters and different themes. And I just found myself marveling at the musical achievement. And it was brilliantly conducted by an English conductor who joyously emerged at the opening of the concert. He emerged in full Darth Vader costume, and the response was just electric. I mean, people went crazy, and there was just this exhilaration through the concert hall, and just a great, a palpable sense of excitement and affection and love and nostalgia for the Star Wars world, and an evident and much appreciated sense of humour on the part of the conductor. And he launched straight into the 20th Century Fox theme music, that, percussive fanfare with the spotlights that you can you'll probably easily bring to mind if you think of any 20th Century Fox movie from from the many years that it was there at the start of those any 20th Century Fox production. And he went from that into the opening theme music of Star Wars, which is the iconic piece of music that was just so thrilling as a child who was a fan of Star Wars to hear. And here's my confession. When that music started last week, and it's a week ago today that we were there, I swear to God, I nearly burst into tears. I was so overwhelmed by the assault of emotion that I felt, the thrill of hearing that music live, the enormity of the sound, and the what it triggered in me. I was immediately reverted to my childhood and my adoration of those movies and those characters. And I probably spent, a full minute or a minute and a half just struggling to compose myself, because I was about to start sobbing. It was ridiculous and pathetic, and kind of beautiful as well. And I didn't dare look at my wife or daughter. It was, oh my goodness, it was just, it was a mental moment. And then I got it together, and I was just kind of a bit stunned by the depth of emotion I just felt, and just about managed to suppress and get under control. And that was it. I was in. I was I was sold, and this is going to be great. I'm fully committed. At the interval, my wife said, she said she was very aware that I was having a moment. And God knows, I mean, I have no idea what anybody else was experiencing at the concert. I'd like to think I wasn't alone, but I don't know. Maybe other people have been to that kind of event before. I know that's it's very established now, and of course, the concert took place on May the 4th, and I don't know when it became established, but May the 4th is like International Star Wars Day, because the blessing that the Jedis and those who believe in the positive side of the Force would say or dispense is, may the Force be with you. And so May the 4th be with you. So it was absolutely fantastic. We had a great night. And when I say we, I mean me and my wife and that conductor and many, many appreciative members in that audience. And I can't include our daughter because she just found it all a bit too much and was kind of overwhelmed and highly irritated and uncomfortable and pissed off, basically, and spent most of the concert sulking. And I kind of cajoled her with a soft drink and a snack at the interval and persuaded her to stay. But fundamentally, about 15 or 20 minutes in, she leaned into me and said, "I've had enough." And I was like, "No, you haven't. You're going to sit there. You're going to enjoy this." And I was trying to kind of drop in, "Oh, this piece of music happens there," or "Do you know that John Williams also did the music for E.T., which you've seen, and Superman, which you've seen?" The chickens are on parade outside here. Can you hear that? That's what I have to deal with here. I have to deal with this chicken nonsense. And it's, oh my God. I tell you what. Your days are numbered, chickens. Anyway. So there you go. But we got there in the end, and it was a lovely family night out and a great memory. And I have a friend out there who listens to the podcast on occasion. He's one of many Daves. I've got quite a few friends called Dave, and this particular Dave has advocated for a long time the making of memories, and that was definitely a memory and a great one. And you know what? I'm going to take the liberty of utilising the technology at my disposal so I can go out and kill some chickens. I'll be right back. I'm back. I ended up not having to go because the chickens stopped the second I pressed pause. Isn't that amazing? So maybe the chickens, maybe they've got some technology and they're spying on me, and they know when their chicken days are numbered. They literally stopped the second I pressed pause in the recording there. And now, can you hear that? Nothing. That's not dead air. That's beautiful silence. Fantastic. Anyway, there you go. So, interestingly to me, I was thinking about heroes, I suppose. And heroes as a response. Not the creation of heroes, because heroes have been depicted in storytelling for centuries and going back in many, many different cultures. Storytelling and myth making, origin myths, creation myths often feature heroes. In many different guises, and I think in the future I'll dedicate a much more comprehensive episode to maybe looking at some of those myths and origin stories around kind of heroic archetypes. And in particular with reference to Joseph Campbell's work, who's one of the kind of great writers who looked at hero journeys and hero myths, and there's probably a place to incorporate Jungian thinking in there as well, with archetypes and shadow sides. and I know Joseph Campbell was a massive fan, I suppose, of psychoanalysis and the psychoanalytical way of understanding people and storytelling and the ways in which we protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from the harder realities of life, and the way we, I mean, and this harks back a little bit to last week's episode, because Freud got a mention towards the end of last week's episode with his thoughts on conscience, and conscience as a suppressor, in a way, of innate transgressive desires that we feel. But if you want to get my thinking on that, go back and listen to last week's episode. That was episode 50. So yeah, I think in a future episode I might go deeper into the weeds, down, further down the rabbit hole of heroic psychology and heroic literature and heroic myth making and heroism, and heroic archetypes as part of our psychological framework. But today I was thinking more about what attracts us to heroes, what attracts people to heroes, what attracts children to heroes. So as the consumers of heroic tales, what are we seeking? What itch are we trying to scratch? And where does it sit into how we build our own worlds? And where does it sit in how we sort of conceive of what's possible in the world and what's possible in people? And I've been reflecting on this, for a couple of different reasons. And, my daughter's going to feature in the thinking around this, but also revisiting my own relationship with heroic depictions, or depictions of heroes or heroic characters, particularly in movies. And I think, certain characters just jump into my head straight away, and I can, without hesitation, I can go back to Star Wars and go, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, as portrayed by Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford. Like, they were really at the top of my movie heroes as a kid, and then Harrison Ford evolved into Indiana Jones in the Spielberg movies Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And for me, that was Harrison Ford was the guy. And if you think Raiders, I think, came out in 81. I might have seen it in London. I saw it in London. I think that might have been 82. So it goes 8. My daughter's age now. And that was just like a drug. It was just like a drug being injected into my idealism. If my idealism had an appetite, if my idealism was craving something to be addicted to, it was this heroic character. And Harrison Ford was the guy for me. Now, even at that stage, I would have already been maybe consuming a little bit of the old sort of 40s and 50s Hollywood fare, and looking at people like Spencer Tracy and Humphrey Bogart, James Stewart, James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, Fred McMurray, whoever, like these guys, classic age Hollywood leading men, who, many of whom appeared in noirish movies with very sort of murky, in very kind of murky moral milieu, who were walking a very particular line of sort of sardonic survival, cynical and jaded, the post-war hangover, and not, the pre-war stuff was maybe more conventionally heroic, Clark Gable was probably in the mix there as well. John Wayne in the westerns. I mean, these men kind of etched in granite, lived large in my imagination. But then for me, for my generation, the heroes that were actually being pitched to me, because the likes of Bogart, etc., were not being pitched to 8-year-olds in 1982, but Harrison Ford as either Han Solo or Indiana Jones was definitely being pitched to my age group, and you couldn't have found a more willing consumer and spectator and audience member than my young self. So I was thinking, because I was watching the latest Batman film, which is I think it's out there on HBO Max, directed by Matt Reeves, who directed the recent Planet of the Apes movies. I think he did this. He didn't direct the first of those 3 movies, but he directed the second 2, which I think were actually brilliant. Really worth a look. Incredible special effects in the creation of the apes. Sort of, I keep coming across the expression the Uncanny Valley, which is basically a phrase used to describe when you have something depicted on screen that you instinctively know is not real, and yet it's so real that it slips into a particular part of our brain where the brain is going, hold on, how am I actually receiving this? Because it's brilliant and lifelike, but also horrific and unnatural at the same time. And the technology that is now available means the level of verisimilitude is as high as it has ever conceivably been. And so those apes in the Planet of the Apes movies of recent years are just breathtaking in how real they are, but they're sort of confronting at the same time. But fantastic motion picture performances by the actors involved. I'm thinking of Toby Kebbell, young, he's only in his 40s. Anyone younger than me is young. And Andy Serkis, among others. Now, speaking of Andy Serkis, who, if you don't know that name off the top of your head, Andy Serkis is a very good English actor who first came on my radar because he played Gollum in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. And again, the technology of motion capture, which is fundamentally you get a human actor to do the movements and of the character in question, because the character might be humanoid in essence only, but the outward appearance might be something animalistic or monstrous or distinctly non-human, and the technology puts the outward appearance onto the human figure. And Andy Serkis has kind of made this almost a specialty, but has also appeared in other movies in his normal, everyday human form. So, Matt Reeves, who directed those Planet of the Apes movies, just released his Batman movie, which is called, very simply, The Batman. And it features Robert Pattinson, who I was talking about recently enough. I did an episode on distinct selves in movies, distinct characters in movies, and I focused on Robert Pattinson in the Safdie brothers movie Good Time. And Robert Pattinson, of course, really came to prominence in the Twilight kind of tweeny vampire movies from just over 10 years ago. I think the first one came out 2009, 2010, but has established himself as a very, very interesting and kind of brilliant character actor. He's taken on a lot of interesting roles, but he is the new Batman, and that is a 3-hour long movie. But really brilliantly done, and returning the Batman character to his kind of origins, as being just a normal guy who is trying to fight crime and trying to be an effective detective operating outside, but in conjunction with the law, and particularly James Gordon. And it draws heavily on Frank Miller graphic novel Year One, which is probably, again, 20 or 30 years, probably 30 years old, which really showed the Bruce Wayne, the brilliant Bruce Wayne. I don't need to use the word brilliant, but Bruce Wayne is the alter ego of Batman, the orphaned millionaire who decides to act out all his rage and his desire for justice in the guise of the Batman. But anyway, whatever about the movie is well worth looking at. If you didn't see it in the cinema, go and check it out. Again, very noirish, very evocative of David Fincher's Seven. A lot of rain, a lot of darkness, but grounded in this very human depiction of Batman by Robert Pattinson. And I found myself just thinking after watching it, just like, so here I am, I'm 48, and I'm still more than happy to sit down and watch a superhero movie, basically, is what it is. And I don't watch every superhero movie that comes out. Like many people, I've reached a certain saturation point with a lot of the Marvel superhero movies. And there's something about the tone of those Marvel superhero movies, which is, it's just wearing to me. They're just a little bit too clever and a bit too postmodern at times, and a bit too glib and a bit too arch and pop-tastic. And I've watched quite a few of them, and I've enjoyed quite a few of them, but there's only so much of that you can take. And then Batman is kind of the antidote to that, because Batman's legacy, particularly really since Frank Miller kind of redefined what Batman could be with his graphic novels of the late 80s and early 90s, where he just brought a much grittier, much more noirish iteration of Batman to life, and showed like a different path, which was very far away from the 60s TV show with Adam West and Burt Ward, which was kind of very camp and brightly lit. And then even when Tim Burton did the first Batman movie in 1989 with Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson, even that had this sort of the pop sensibility, even though it was a great statement of Burton's vision, which always kind of had that quirky gothic aesthetic, if you think of something like Edward Scissorhands and other of his movies. And I remember when the Batman came out, again, so 89, if I saw it then, it was 15, and it was a massive event, and it had the Prince soundtrack, and Jack Nicholson as the Joker was a very big deal. And again, aesthetically, there were some really nice things about it, and there was something tonally that seemed to be just kind of darker and more psychologically sophisticated than anything the TV series had promised, and earlier iterations of Batman from the comic books, which go back to the 40s, basically. So you're talking about like an 80-year-old creation at this stage. But the question that I was asking myself is, again, as a man in his late 40s, what is the attraction still to this world, to this, and specifically, I suppose, to the character of Batman, because I'm not a fanboy, I'm not a comic nerd, even though I was big into Marvel comics in my teens, my sort of early to mid teens, and more into Marvel really than DC. So DC and Marvel were the two big comic powers, and DC gave us Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and the Green Lantern and other characters like this. And then Marvel was Spider-Man and Captain America and the Incredible Hulk and Thor and the Avengers and the Defenders and X-Men. And Marvel came at a later stage of comic book evolution and addressed more contemporary issues. And many of the characters were humans who, through various kind of misadventures or bad luck or good luck, became superheroes, and then had to kind of decide how to live with the power they'd been given. And they, Marvel always felt a bit more in tune with the times, and so in a way it wasn't that surprising that Marvel, after a few attempts, finally got the tone right to make this massive sort of output of superhero movies over the last 14 years. I think there's like 22 or 23 Marvel movies and counting, and plenty more to come, and TV show spin-offs. And for many people it's kind of been the death of cinema, because everything seems to want to follow this model of massive blockbuster superhero, this kind of superhero iteration. Everything has to be on that scale, and it's not, it's leaving no room for anything else, because as ever, in Hollywood certainly, they only want the winning formula, and as long as that's a winning formula and people are making buckets of money, that's all they're interested in putting their money into. So if you get something like Matt Reeves's The Batman, it's kind of an antidote to that, because it goes down a very different road, much more grounded, much darker, much grittier, and much more confronting in its way. But yeah, I digress for the umpteenth time. The question is, why am I still attracted to that stuff? What is the attraction of hero stories? And this is where I'm bringing my daughter into this now, because I was thinking about disappointment. And my daughter had a friend over at the weekend. The friend stayed for a sleepover and they had great fun, and the friend went home the next day, and after she went home my daughter was quite upset and just felt really kind of sad that the fun was over, and really kind of took it to heart for a while, and was also kind of lamenting the end of the weekend, and she was probably a bit overtired and she shed a few tears, and I just kind of cajoled her around and finally kind of helped her get back, recover her good mood. But it got me thinking about how we kind of cope with disappointment. And I mean, you could argue that that's not disappointment, that's a sort of form of grief, that the good thing is over, the good thing is past. And of course, who among us doesn't recognize that feeling, that, if you're still out there in the working world, or you recall your school days, that kind of Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening feeling like, oh crap, back to work tomorrow, back to school tomorrow, back to the grind, back to that place where I'm not free. And that was a feeling that would often come at the end of the summer holidays, that would come at the end of the Christmas break, that would come at, so many places, family from overseas come to visit and they have to go back home, and so many different scenarios where it's the end of the experience, and there's a sort of a a micro grief that we have to process. And I suppose I got to thinking about, well, you know, what's so bad about what you have? What's so, you know, that the departure of these other elements, whether it's the end of a festival period, whether it's the end of the weekend, the end of the holidays, whether it's the end of a friend being to visit, or the end of family, extended family being to visit, what leaves your world looking so pallid and grey and insipid and cold and desolate when that time comes to an end, and this, you know, this is the area I was thinking around, and I'm not going to dwell on my own childhood at this particular moment, but I was really sort of having a moment of recognition, you know, with my daughter, and understanding, like, oh yeah, I remember that feeling really well. Just the bitter kind of sadness of, oh crap, the fun's over. And what's next? You know, when are the fun times coming back again? And then, you know, that, you know, the link I'm trying to make here then is that where heroes step in? I mean, and let me just be very quick here to clarify. I don't think of the world in terms of heroes and villains, and I think the idea of, you know, as a grown up, as an adult, the idea of having a hero is kind of embarrassing and juvenile. And I mean, I've been using that word juvenile a bit lately in my dismissal of cancel culture and the less savoury, less thoughtful aspects of woke politics and woke culture. But the idea of having a hero, yeah, as I say, it seems juvenile. It seems to be rooted in something childish. It's got an infantilizing aspect to it. And I suppose when you talk about sort of fanboy culture or nerd culture, there's definitely an aspect of that culture that can have that criticism leveled at it, that it's all sort of arrested development, it's all permanent, you know, perpetual adolescence. And gaming culture perhaps is, you know, falls into that territory as well. Role play and I don't know what. I mean, and again, so I'm not having any great investment in those worlds or subcultures or societies or communities. I'm not here to slag people off or dismiss them. I'll save that for when I'm, you know, off the air. Judgment guns fully loaded and at the ready as always. No, I mean, I'm not trying to, again, this marriage is better than that marriage, and this marriage has been going on a long time and that marriage hasn't, so don't talk to me about this marriage until that marriage has caught up with this marriage. I don't want to disparage, you know, I'm not here to disparage anyone, for God's sake, you know, well, within reason. But again, the idea of having a hero as an adult, I don't know. I mean, I think, I mean, this is you know, this is where my thoughts have been sort of you know, circulating, percolating, ruminating. I mean, as a wellness idea, the idea of a hero suggests that maybe we're always looking to be saved, or we're looking for someone else to be our protector, someone else to be that stand against, evil forces. And that is an infantilizing idea, because ultimately we want to take that role ourselves, and we want to be our own protector, and we want to be the one who has the wherewithal to repel negative forces, evil forces. And again, you've I hope you can hear. Of course, I'm not talking about evil in conventional, traditional hero-villain terms, but let's put it into a wellness paradigm of things that are unhelpful and unhealthy for me, things that impact my sense of self-worth, the things that are obstacles to my self-care, and how am I going to deal with those? And then, we can go back and go, well, what do I model my optimum behavior on? So do I go to my cupboard, my wardrobe, and pull out a Superman costume or a Captain America costume or an Incredible Hulk costume? Would probably be one of the cheapest, because I just need a torn pair of purple shorts. A Batman costume, and do I put on do I put on a cape and a cowl? That's a great one, isn't it? The Batman cowl. Nice little word, C-O-W-L, because that's the horned the horned helmet. Jesus, I love a horned helmet. I would love, and I mean love, a horned helmet right now. That's the cowl. What Bruce Wayne puts on his head. Can't call it a mask. It's not a hood. And it's not horned either, by the way, okay? Smarty pants. They're ears. They're not horns. They're little bat ears. Yeah? Because bats are bloody blind, and they need ears to negotiate the world. They use their little sonic vibrations, don't they? We all know that. Come on, animal lovers. Lovers of bats. You know that. I know that. We know that. So I was asking the question, who do we model our optimum behaviour on? And see, this is where I'm asking the question, are we attracted to fictional heroes because of the dearth, the complete absence of real life heroes? I mean, heroes are idealized creations. Now, again, to throw back to the Marvel comic book creations, a lot of those heroes were very flawed, and in their heroic, their heroic selves, they'd live out heroic actions once they were in costume and fighting villains and doing heroic deeds. But in their private human lives, they were often very flawed characters struggling with very mundane things. I mean, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man's alter ego, Peter Parker was probably the epitome of that. Peter Parker going, damn it, I didn't get a chance to wash my Spider-Man suit and it stinks, and I've got to go out and fight Kraven the Hunter, or the Sandman, or the Vulture, or Dr. Octopus, and my Spider-Man suit is still wet and a bit stinky because I didn't have a chance to wash it properly and it hasn't dried yet. Peter Parker going, damn, I haven't managed to pay the rent this month because I didn't take enough photos for J. Jonah Jameson, the editor of the newspaper where he works. Peter Parker's in trouble because he had to miss a date with his girlfriend and she wants to kill him. So all of that sort of relatability of the Marvel heroes was part of their enormous appeal. Ben Grimm's The Thing from the Fantastic Four, the sort of the man who turned into basically a monstrous figure made of orange bricks, and he was obsessed with the loss of his humanity, and he fell in love with a blind woman because she couldn't see how ugly he was, and he was tortured with self-doubt and self-loathing. And in one of his storylines, he ended up as part of this kind of super force of superheroes fighting together against intergalactic forces who were trying to destroy planet Earth, and all these superheroes left Earth to fight wars in outer space. And when the Thing went to outer space, on one of the planets he ended up on, he realized he was able to be a human again. So he didn't want to go back to Earth because he loved being human, and he fell in love with someone there as well. So I mean, like, these were the stories. So like the Thing, I loved that character because he always, in spite of him being one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel universe, as strong as the Hulk, he always had this vulnerability around, who's going to love me, because I'm hideous, which is it's such a profoundly adolescent concern. And let's forget about being an adolescent. It's such a profoundly human concern. Am I lovable? Who's going to take me? Who's going to care for me? Who's going to tell me that I'm worthy of love, and of romantic love? And so again, like, as a consumer of hero stories, do I still enjoy hero stories? Because the world is populated with imperfect people, and there are no heroes. There are no perfect people, and I'm not challenged by that. I mean, it's like, of course not, and yet the enjoyment of watching a movie like The Batman is to see someone who is remorselessly moral and remorselessly driven by their conviction that this is the right thing to do. And in the world of Batman, and particularly in the movie iterations of the last 15 years or so, the Batman exists in a world that is morally completely bankrupt, and everywhere there is corruption, everywhere there is social and political failing, and sort of human degradation, and broken people and broken souls. And Batman is this sort of grim figure who is fighting against the tide of the dissolution of the human spirit and the human soul and human optimism and positivity. And he's like, we're all in this stink, this morass together, and it's overwhelming, and the choice is there to give up and be beaten, but I ain't gonna. And you see, maybe that's the germ of it all. The I'm not going to be the one who gives up. I'm going to keep fighting. And I mean, I've spoken before. Go back a few episodes and you'll find an episode I did on defiance as a tool of wellness. I'm a big believer in that idea that you're not going to let life beat you down. Life is life is tough. Life is challenging. It's been particularly challenging in the years of the pandemic. It is particularly challenging at this time of growing wealth inequality. So many different reasons, and there's so many different reasons that life can be extremely confronting, and it can wear on you and break you down and erode your sense of what's possible. And I believe one of the answers is to engage with a very strong personal defiance that says, no, I'm not going to bow. I'm not going to yield. I might bend, but I won't break. And maybe that's the appeal of a certain type of hero. And again, returning to my own relationship, as a child, to some of this, another phrase that's bandied around now, the intellectual property, my relationship to the IP of Star Wars in particular, and that moment of intense emotion at the concert last week, which, as I say, reverted me to my childhood state of awe and adulation, and romance, really. And there's a lot of romance, I think, in believing in heroic types and heroic characters and heroic arcs, and I hope, I suppose, that if you accept this theory that fictional heroes are more and more attractive to people who feel, I don't have those role models in my life. I mean, there's something sad about that as well, and I think sort of socially, maybe philosophically, psychologically, it's very healthy and very life affirming to look around at people, to look around at people in your life, and to not to try to elevate them to, as I said, this kind of infantilizing idea of heroism, but to actually stop and step back and go, what has that person actually, what have they had to cope with, and what have they had to survive to get to this place and still have their humanity intact? What have they had to endure or suffer or get through or get over, and still be here putting their best foot forward, to still be here engaging with life with an open heart? See, I can't help but think of that as a form of heroism. Now, I don't know, I hear myself say that, and maybe that sounds a bit wet and a bit over the top, but that's kind of how I conceive of it. And it does lend itself to that idea of defiance, to go, no, I'm still here and I'm still doing it. I'm not going away, and I accept the challenge. And that is a form of heroism. I mean, maybe the word heroism should just be retired, and it's overused maybe in popular culture, and it's overused in maybe tabloid culture and sensationalist culture, and in this oversimplification of how we understand people and good acts or selfless acts or altruistic acts. People are complex, and people are capable of doing great things and lovely things, and capable of being obnoxious. That can all be contained in the same person. So trying to put that heroism frame on top of acts is not necessarily the thing. I like the idea of heroism as a hallmark of survival and willingness to engage. And on that note, I will say goodbye and I will disengage. So thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find me on social media if that's your thing. The Clear Out 2 is on Twitter. The Clear Out Podcast is on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And you can email me at theclearoutlive@gmail.com. You can use the supporter link wherever you're listening to this to throw some financial support the way of the podcast if you like. Or if you want to become a regular contributor to the podcast, you can use the Patreon link. That's patreon.com/theclearout. All good. Stay safe, stay well. Don't be a hero. Or do. Hey, live your life. You do you. I'll talk to you real soon. I'll see you next week. All the best. Mind yourselves. Bye bye. Cheers.